Welcome to In Great Company. This is the podcast where we explore how thriving businesses build relationships at scale. Hosted by Sindhu Shavastav and Danielle Tourette, we sit down with top executives to uncover the strategies that create stronger connections, engage teams, and lasting success. Let's dive in.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to In Great Company, the podcast where we explore how meaningful relationships fuel extraordinary business outcomes, deeply fulfilling careers. I'm Sindhu, the CEO of WeCrush AI and WeCrush Events.
And I'm Kelsey, Corporate Event Manager here at WeCrush. Today's episode is a special one, and this episode is brought to you by WeCrush Events, your ultimate partner in corporate event planning. At WeCrush Events, we do just that, crush events. We know that a company's event is a reflection of its brand, and we're here to make sure it's nothing short of perfect. Whether you need help sourcing vendors or a full-scale, all-hands-on-deck approach, our expert team has the skills and connections to bring your vision to life. And the best part, there are no planning or production fees, just seamless, stress-free event execution. Make your next event unforgettable and contact us at wecrushevents.com/contact-us/period. Our guest has helped build and scale some of the most sophisticated commercial engines in the world, and she brings a rare mix of rigor, humanity, and clarity to leadership.
We're joined by Akansha Aggarwal, a Senior Vice President at Uber Freight, who's driven over $1 billion in growth across Amazon, Google, Meta, NetApp, and now Uber Freight.
At Uber Freight, Akansha leads global commercial strategy, marketing, pricing, RevOps, and solution architecture. She's also an aerospace engineer by training, a board-ready operator, an investor, a mom, and the voice behind the leadership philosophy #uncomfortable-middle. Akansha, welcome to In Great Company.
Well, I'm very, very, very excited. And clearly, this is one of the best companies to start the new year's with. So appreciate the kind words. And really looking to have, an engaging, fun conversation here.
Yeah, thank you. So, Akansha, you've led go-to-market and RevOps at Amazon, Google, Meta, NetApp, and now Uber Freight. When you look back, what is the through line of your career, the story beneath the resume?
Yeah, so, Sindhu, it's funny because I get this question a lot around, where are you going next? And I will always get that, are you going to Apple or Netflix to complete the FANG analogy here? But, as I think about that through line, right, the logos have mattered far less than the problems I've kept choosing. And I think that's the constant. So I've always been drawn to complex systems under pressure. So if you think about going back to that aerospace journey, right, the aerospace engineering taught me respect for physics and failure modes. Like it's probably one of the places where you cannot fail. And if do, there's a very high risk. Finance pivot into my career taught me consequences of whether I asked for it or not. The big tech has really taught me how to think about scale. So when somebody says, hey, what can we do to be 2x? My question isn't how we get to 2x. My first question is, but why 2x? Why not 10? And I think that is just embedded in the way I've grown into professionally and personally. And then go-to-market has taught me something very fundamental, that no system works unless humans trust it, which we undermine often. So the story underneath the resume really is about connecting strategy to execution and then building the systems that don't just look good in planning, but hold up when the reality hits, because reality does hit often and quite in your face.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Great. Yeah. Well, it kind of brings us to the next question. You coined the #uncomfortable-middle. What's a moment in your life or career where you learned about #uncomfortable-middle as a leader?
Yeah, so actually, maybe a quick 30 seconds journey on the uncomfortable middle. Last year, I really started putting my thoughts to paper and started the series around no shortcuts. because I wanted to really start with the foundation of why, whether it's leadership, whether it's individual contributor, why they're just making an impact, right? There are no shortcuts. It requires grit, it requires hard work, it requires reflection. And then as I was reflecting in 2025, coming into 2026, where I sit today in the space, whether as a mom, whether as a leader, you realize that the uncomfortable middle is probably the least talked about, right? Everybody gets excited when they write the strategy document and they get the high fives and they get the alignment. And then everybody gets excited when you get the win. And I think you can relate to it from a We Crush events perspective. The uncomfortable middle, when things go wrong, when you are pivoting, when you're experimenting, when you're failing fast and failing often and figuring out what's next, I think that's the part where I feel that I sit as a leader right now. And that's why I wanted to really reflect and write more about that uncomfortable middle. Because, the thing I would say is like raising, how do you raise those standards without breaking people? How do you coach in real time, not hindsight? How do you make decisions before the certainty arrives? And how do you carry ambiguity, Sindhu? I'm sure you can relate to this as a CEO, so that others don't have to, right? That's a privilege and a burden. And I think that's the uncomfortable middle of leadership, I am in, and hence the pivot. So I think to answer your question, Kelsey, I'm certainly in that moment now as we think about, right, a lot of 2025 for me, as I kind of got into the 6 months journey of Uber Freight, was very much about setting the strategy, setting the foundation. And now it's the part that you got to really get into the tactics, the grind of whether the strategy works. And look, I don't know about you, not every strategy you start with works, right? As long as the vision is clear, as long as you're thinking and learning and measuring the strategy and making the right pivots, you get to the outcome. I think so. To answer your question, that I am very much in that state of uncomfortable middle right now.
No, thank you for that clarity, Akanksha, because you're right. As a CEO, there is people think, oh, just because you're a CEO, you have it all and somehow you can lord and rule over others. You and I know that's not the truth at all. Because as a CEO, you're holding so much for the team. Everything you do, you think of is in service of the team, right? Every decision is, how do I compound success for everybody involved? And sometimes you can't come up with strategies that work for everyone. So you're choosing strategies that work for most. And that is such a difficult place to sit in, because you know that people you deeply care about and that you want to carry, sometimes it's just it's very hard to do. It's very hard to bring everybody along, and it's so uncomfortable. And that's something I had to learn. And especially coming from corporate America to an entrepreneurship, it's not lost on me how much rides on you, right?
Yeah. That's why I said, Sindhu, it's both a privilege and a responsibility, but a burden, right? That you carry, a good burden, but it is nevertheless one, and it's often not talked about.
Oh my God, it is heavy, and that's why the leadership, right? It's when things get hard and tough, and I had to learn this because I've run for the hills before. I was like, man, this is so difficult to do, and I'm just flailing and bailing out. But after a period of doing so, you're like, okay, I can't run away from this forever. I have to come back and take it across. So that's been a very, very big lesson. I love that you're talking about it because, like you said, many people they hide it. They're they don't want anyone to see the messiness of the middle. They want to see all the pretty stuff at the beginning and all the pretty stuff at the end. But damn, this messiness in between. So
yeah. And I think last thing I will say on that, right? I think it's, as there's a saying, right? Leadership shows up when the times are hard, not when the times are good. And I think that hard middle, right, is when it tests your value as a human being, it tests your values as a leader. And I think the point that you made, Sindhu, is so appropriate. Not always everybody will understand or needs to see or may have visibility into the middle, right? So how do you sort of balance by giving the context and holding that ambiguity with you while still driving and leading with clarity, right, with what your teams are looking for?
No, love that. Okay, so my next question was actually going to be about, the engineering mindset and how that helped you. And you already talked a little bit about it. You talked about systems, you talked about risk assessment, and so on and so forth. In terms of the engineering mindset as it applies to people, that I'm really interested in, right? Like how, because, a lot of us, we think of like, oh, engineers, they're not very, they don't have very good people skills. And yet you can't be an SVP of a very large team without good people skills. So talk
Yeah.
a little bit more about that.
So, I mean, you're an engineer, so you get this, right? So think about any engineering project you ever did. At least what it taught me was that systems often fail at their weakest interface,
Mm-hmm.
not in the big bulks of the projects, right? So in businesses, that interface is almost always human. Like
Yeah.
you can define the best strategy, you can define, like, why do we talk about like change management can make or break? Culture can eat strategy for breakfast. For the same reason, because it's that weakest interface, but it can also be a strength. So, like, as I think about designing go-to-market systems, the way, like, I'll use the aerospace analogy. The way you design aircraft, you think about redundancy, you think about feedback loops, you think about clear ownership, you think about respect of how people actually will behave, right? Because if you plan for what's um, mathematically possible,
Yeah.
then you can't afford to fail when you're designing an aircraft. So you're also thinking about all the redundancies and all the aspects that can go wrong and then having those contingency plans, right? So I think that's kind of where I connect that engineering mindset to people in growth. And it's not necessarily from a place of risk mitigation. It's from a place of how do you leverage the weakest interface to be your strength.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah.
think that's my sort of connection point between the two.
I love that, right? Like, I mean, it's almost like saying, by the way, human beings are, to me, yes, they're the weakest link, and they're also the strongest link a lot of times, right? Because they're the ones with the brightest ideas and so on and so forth. And for me, as an engineer, I've had to think about not just the mean performance, I've had to think about what is the standard deviation and what do the tails look like? Like when shit goes really south, what does the tail look like? And do I have redundancy built on the tails? Because like you said, having too many systems depend on one person is very risky for a company. And We Crush Events, my whole job at We Crush Events has been, how do I make this company so resilient, like either from a financial systems perspective or a human resources perspective, like so resilient that there's just not like one level of failure, there's like three levels of failure that it can stomach and that it can thrive through. So
Yeah.
completely like
I
understand.
think the only other thing I will add to that is, right, like as an engineer, you're taught to be logical. You want to know context. But if you really apply to leadership, right, you can get people to disagree and commit if you give them the context,
Mm.
the facts, the clarity. I think oftentimes the disagreement and non-committal happens because they don't know why you want to go in that direction.
Yeah.
So I like, again, there's so many parallels you can draw from engineering, and I'm certainly biased being an engineer. I draw from it, like so do you, but uh, I do think they're very intertwined.
Yeah, for sure.
Definitely. I don't have that engineering aspect or education background, but it definitely resembles events. You can never truly know how the attendees are going to behave. So the contingency plans are super important. We always say attendees move like water. They follow the path of least resistance. So, we have our estimations and our guesses of how they're going to act, but never truly know. So don't have
Yeah.
that engineering
Yeah, see,
connection, but it definitely resonates in event
you
planning.
bring up such an important point because like before I came to We Crush Events, I thought events were all about art. And actually, event planning is, I think, one of the top three or top five most stressful jobs. And the amount of planning and structure that goes into events is ridiculous. And I'm like, oh my God, this is just engineering by another name. Right? Like it's,
That is so
so,
true. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, definitely a lot of similarities. I want to kind of move the conversation over to how we're building a modern signal-driven GTM engine. So you talk a lot about moving from linear funnels to signal-driven loops. So for a CEO or CRO listening, what does a truly signal-driven GTM engine look like in practice?
Yeah, this is a question that's very close to my heart because I live it every day. And I think we, or at least I will say, we grew up as a go-to-market leaders where companies were still operating linear funnels. Like even 90% of the times, if you ask somebody, hey, explain your funnel, they'll start with, this is what marketing is doing, and then this is what events is doing, and this is what SDRs are doing, and right, kind of following that journey. But a signal-driven engine is different. Like if, especially in the world that we're in, it's built on loops. And a lot of signals can come from a lot of different places, not always at the inception of, right, that event. Like, I'm not saying that that is not important, but it's no longer a linear funnel in that sense. So you get signals from customers, you get signals from usage, you get signals from pricing, you get signals from sellers' behavior, you get signals from service. And all of those signals have to feed into decision moments. I think the risk we run is if we continue operating from a linear funnel, then you're ignoring all the signals that you're getting in the middle and the late stage and throughout the customer's journey. So who you engage, how do you price, where do you invest, when to intervene, I think are all important signals. So like I think that's my biggest feedback is like stop thinking about your go-to-market as a linear funnel. And I think the power of that is not just how you think, how you design organizations, how intertwined they need to be, who acts on the signals, are the systems between these intertwined teams actually talking to each other versus being kind of isolated. So, and I, as much as dashboards and data is important to me, I always say like loops are more important. Like I would rather take 5 signals instead of 20, as long as they are actually, there's a closing loop to that signal with, again, who's going to act on it, what the action is requested, how do I know that they did? And if they did it, what was the reason? So we can learn from it. So that's kind of my take on signals overall.
I think NFL would agree with you because like it's just not about, oh, I'm a tight end and all I will do is play the tight end position. I mean, there are actually plays where the tight end sometimes like has to convert into a defending person or whatever, because it's literally the ultimate goal is you need to put points on the board or revenue on the board. And what is that mechanism that like really puts revenue on the board? I love that, Akansha, because what you're doing is again like just the engine. I have to come back to the engineering because it's logical, right? Like I mean, if all you do is events without any context or purpose, like how is that event actually going to generate revenue for you? I mean, at the end of the day, you're not spending money because it's for fun to spend money. You're spending money so that you can make more money. So.
Yeah, and I think like Sindhu, I'll put this in the context of events, right? Like a lot of organizations in the past, right, have focused on events for prospecting or, because that's an ROI every CFO wants to hear or every CEO wants to hear. But when you really think about events, sometimes you're doing an event for service management. Sometimes you're doing an event because your NPS score is bad. Sometimes you're doing an event because an existing set of cohort of customers is showing that they really want to know about this new product, new solution. So I really like pick anything is my point, like whether you pick events, whether you pick ad campaign, whether you think about selling engagement, you do get signals from a lot of different places. So as a CEO, CRO, COO, if you continue to think about like kind of that one linear funnel top to bottom, then we're missing the fact that our customers are engaging with us in different ways than the traditional way we all kind of grew up.
Akansha, like I don't know if you've read Peter Thiel's 0 to 1.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So Peter Thiel talks about what is that universal truth that is hiding in plain sight that, everybody somehow just seems to overlook or miss or something. And for me, one of the biggest truths that's hiding in plain sight is this. Human connection drives return on investment. Because go ask like any top salesperson from any company, whether they admit it to you or not, and some of them will admit it. They'll be like, people buy from me because they like me. Right? And have you ever bought anything from a salesperson you don't like? I haven't.
Yeah, I might even say like Sindhu, like if I was being even more precise, right? Trust is what I hear often.
Yeah.
They trust me that I will deliver what matters to them and I will hold.
Yeah. And 100% of your revenue comes from that trust, like fondness, appreciation, whatever you want to call it. Like it comes from that. So as a company, like how many spaces are you creating for that connection to form? And similarly, most companies P&L, 30 to 40% of your P&L is employees. And if your employees are living in anxiety, depression, whatever, like how are they going to do the best work of their lives? So it's like, just hiding in plain sight, and everybody is like, oh, the first thing we'll cut is like the holiday. I mean, I'm not saying holiday party is the only way to like put employee engagement on the table, but like, I mean, somewhere to like make your employees feel valued. So yeah. All right, fantastic. What do most companies, where do most companies go wrong with RevOps? Like, what do they think it is versus what does it actually need to be to drive growth?
Yeah, so I think the shortest answer I will give there, right? There are companies that are doing it better now, but there are many RevOps driven companies that are still thinking about RevOps as a reporting and tooling engine. But I think the framework there is like RevOps in reality is decision architecture.
Mm,
Where do I want to go?
mm,
How do I want to go there? And what is the most effective and efficient way of going there? If you think about those three questions and you think about who's helping shape those questions, I think that's where RevOps sits.
So you're saying it's not really ops in the standard sense of operations, it's strategy.
100%.
Yeah.
Look, I love and hate the word strategy because of the connotation it has had in the past, right? People think about strategy as like you took this big vision idea deck and you put it forward. But I think strategy is very deeply embedded in operations or in execution. In other words, I think there's operational strategy. Operations isn't you're going and moving from point A to point B because somebody told you to go there. I think at least in all my experience, right, leading RevOps, very much what I have seen is having the seat at the table to help clarify and simplify where should we go. And by the way, by virtue of that, Sindhu, where should we not go? Because that's equally important. So where do we go? And then how do we get there? And then that's and the power of tooling and data comes is how do I now get there in the most effective and efficient manner?
Yeah.
But I think the first two pieces get missed.
I totally see that, right? Because Alex Schultz, who's the CMO of Facebook, I remember like I had an offer to join his team like way back when in the day, and I said no. And whatever, my life took a different direction and so on. But one of the things he tells me in my interview is this. He's like, Sindhu, you know this, right? Like strategy without execution is hallucination.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not my quote, it's Alex Schultz's quote in my interview. And I was like, damn, like this guy like completely nailed it, because that's all you. And for me, I think my superpower has always been execution, but I didn't really understand that that's why it was my superpower, right? Like, I mean, it was getting things done was so important. So
Actually, I'll give a very different lens quickly. Here's the risk when strategy and operations doesn't go together from a RevOps perspective. Now, imagine if your RevOps team was purely focused on operations. You're forgetting the part that they have these signals, going back to the signal conversation. They're in the data, understanding the signals that should define the strategy on where we're going. So keeping it as an operational execution engine means you're again like going, not actually acting on the signals that you're actually getting from your customer.
And that comes back to your point on loops, right? Like what is that feedback loop where it's a constant living, breathing thing. It's not like the static thing that it's like monolithic and doesn't change and whatever, because businesses are so dynamic, right? Like, I mean, so yeah, amazing. Yeah, Kathy, you're next.
So this might tie into the previous question a little bit, but it's so impressive how you've helped scale multi-billion-dollar businesses. When you walk into a new go-to-market org, what are the first three signals you inspect to understand if it's set up to win?
Yeah, so if I could actually say one, because I think the one precedes the other two, but I'll give you three.
We like root causes. That's a root cause model, right?
Yeah, so I would say I think the very first one, and it sounds cliche, right? But it's customer value realization. Tell me which customer is going to buy from you the second time if they didn't get the perceived or anticipated value. And I think oftentimes, right, like I think so before I even jump into like, what's the organization, what's the dashboard, what I am really trying to understand is, are the customers actually realizing the value that they were sold in adoption? in outcomes, right? In economic impact, whatever way you define that, right?
Mm.
And if the value isn't landing, by the way, everything else is just motion. Like
Yeah.
you can do every perfect go-to-market tactic in the book and it's not going to land. So I think that's why I said if I could only pick one, I would always pick customer value realization and understanding that deeply. And I think here's the reality, Sindhu. I challenge us to go and talk to 20 RevOps leaders, CRO, CEO, and ask them, do you have a way to tell whether your customer is getting value from you? And I challenge all of us collectively that 9 out of 10, or probably 10 out of 10 times, they will say, no, I wish I could. So I think this is an area where, I mean, it's a journey. We haven't solved it, but I think this is, in small shapes or form, you have to figure out, right, are your customers getting value? I think the second and the third would be decision latency. I think this is often, again, not talked about a lot. So I would say, how long does it take for me to actually act on that signal? And this is where disparate organizations not having a loop, is it my job or is it post sales? Is it marketing or is it sales? Is it customer success or is it sales? Like those conversations, right? I think is very important to understand. Is the go-to-market engine even set up seamlessly for us to act on the signal fast enough? And this is where the efficiency and the effectiveness of RevOps gets into. And then the third is account coherence. What I mean by that is, does sales, marketing, pricing, CS, do they share the same view of the customer's goals, risks, and growth path? Or are they all operating in kind of their own silo of what they believe the customer strategy is or is needed? So I know that doesn't sound a lot of like dashboards and tools, etc. But I think for me, knowing what problem I need to solve for and where we are on a scale of 1 to 10 with those three things, customer value realization, decision latency, ability to act on the signal, and then account coherence or customer coherence really tells me like what is the first area, second area, third area to go solve.
I absolutely love the framing. Like at WeCrush events, we actually send out a survey immediately after an event is complete because we really like want to understand, right? So from an executive perspective, the first thing I saw was I've never seen a company with like its NPS in the 90s, but that's what I'm seeing at WeCrush because it's again like such a high touch relationship that I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I mean, people really love like the people that they're working with because it's such a human to human connection. But Akanksha, like, as you say, customer value realization, a lot of times, like, I think of you as leading the go-to-market pricing, service delivery, and solution delivery organization. How have you come across places where customers are not satisfied because the product itself is not set up right?
Yes. I mean, I
How
think
have you navigated that? Because
yeah.
that's like not, I'm assuming it's not your organization, it's probably some a peer organization.
I think there are two things I would say. And the reason I paused when you said that, absolutely, yes, I've seen it. But I think it's less sometimes about whether the product is right. I think the way I would answer that question is the product right for that customer? In fact, let me correct myself. Is the solution right for that customer, right? Because product is a means to an end. Oftentimes, it's more about like whether the solution was designed to actually solve the customer problem. Like I'll not share the customer's name, but I'll pick a big automobile customer that we were recently having this conversation was. Like we went into the conversation wanting to deliver the best pitch ever and show that we can drive you X amount of savings, right, on all of your logistics spend. I think the part that we missed was the customer didn't necessarily care about, I mean, yes, they care about savings, but that wasn't their burning question. Their burning question was service. Like they were willing to pay 20% above what they're paying today because their service was so important to them and their customers. And I think this is where I say, like, did we actually solve for the right problem? And did we actually put the right solution? So I think the question you were asking is like, when that happens, like, how do you navigate? And I think this is where I say, Sindhu, how many times have you ever had a hard time getting cross-functional buy-in? I mean, you're the CEO, so it's different for you.
100% owner CEO, might I add, so very different for me. So I empathize and I have.
No, but that you were not a CEO, right? Like Sindhu, the number of times you can navigate a cross-functional organization to come to the table If everybody is talking about what the customer value gap was, I think often the disconnect is because we're not looking at this from the lens of the customer. We're looking at this from our own individual siloed lens of internal facing company.
Yeah.
But I think the moment you say, look, this is the reality, our customer was told this is how they want value, they're not getting this is the part of the product not working. Like I've often found customer lens to be a neutralizer for organizations. You know, it's a hard one to argue against.
I completely understand. And also, like, I've been part of these conversations. I'm going to push a little bit ahead of that, which is, we've all been in organizations where we've had leaders who care a little bit more about their image versus what the customer is going through. So it becomes like, oh, this will make me look bad, so I'm going to like try to defend my position on this. Has that ever happened? And do you have any best practices in how you might navigate that?
So look, I mean, I would say, I think I'm a person just fundamentally who likes to assume best intent.
Yeah.
So maybe my answer, when that happens, or when there's a perception that that's what's happening, where they're acting because they're worried about their brand or image, I always wonder, is it happening because they don't understand yet what the customer problem is, or they don't understand why the customer problem is connected to the function that their team is doing, whether it's product, whether it's service, etc. And so I think the very first guidance I always give to myself is, right, have I done my part in making sure that they actually understand why their action can change the outcome for the customer, right? I always tell my husband when we're talking about, disciplining kids and setting boundaries, is like, don't attack the person, attack the problem.
Yeah.
So I think that's my always guidance is, right? Like, I think when we attack the problem, it's easier to get these cross-functional leaders on the table versus attacking the function or the person.
I love that answer, because then it like, you can now be a hero because you've solved the problem versus, and probably have a better image. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Awesome. Kelty, is the next thing mine?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. Fantastic. Okay. So Uber Freight sits at the intersection of shippers, carriers, last mile partners, and partners like Better Trucks. How do you think about connection at such, it's a complex network. So how are you navigating a seamless connected system across so many moving parts?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think, by the way, that complexity is what got me here, because people ask me the question, like, you don't have freight background or transportation management background, like why Uber Freight? And I was like, when I was so fascinated with the complexity of the ecosystem, and by the way, the impact that ecosystem has on all of our lives. Like, we're talking about goods that you use, I use, Kelsey use, like everybody. So it's very much kind of reality, rooted in the reality of our economy and economic system. So I think the best way I would say is, like, when people ask me, like, is Uber Freight a marketplace? And I will always say, it technically is a marketplace, but I think the better way I would describe is it's a network of trust, because it is a very human-driven ecosystem. Yes, there's shippers. Yes, there's carriers. Yes, there's brokers. Yes, there's last mile partners. Like, but at the end of the day, like, you can have a carrier that has 100,000 fleet, and you can have a carrier that has one fleet. Like, I can be a carrier with one truck, right? So at the end of the day, this is human, and each one of these parts of this complex ecosystem are driven with different incentives. The incentive for a shipper is different than the incentive for a carrier, then it's different from an incentive for a broker, etc. Right? So my job, and the way I think about this is, right, is to design a commercial system where value flows transparently and fairly across that network of trust. And it has to flow transparently and fairly. The word here being fairly, because if there is a perceived value, Sindhu, think about, like, if the shipper perceives the value that they're getting, less value than the carrier, right? Then the demand and supply doesn't work, or the other way around, right? If the carrier perceives, so it has to be fair. So I think that's where transparency becomes very important. And I think this is where, by the way, the power of AI and technology allows us to bring that complexity in a more simplified, transparent, insight-driven place in a much faster way than was possible years and years ago.
How are you showing, like, how do you, like, talk to me a little bit about transparency? Like, how are you showing everybody that this is fair?
Yeah. So, look, a couple of years ago, I think 2 years ago, we had launched this product called Insights AI. And it was very, very well received by a lot of our, top shippers. But really what Insights AI was doing was innovating and providing the insights about their freight. So, how your freight's moving from point A to point B, how often it's moving, how often it's being picked up on time, where it is, like track and trace and all of that, in the hands of the operator in a way that allows them to mitigate. And I'll pick a consumer example because that always, right, is easy for a, like, imagine if Colgate Palmolive or Kellogg had a delay of even a few hours on the shelf of Safeway, Whole Foods, or wherever you shop from, right? That's millions of dollars of losses to that shipper in that day. But also it's a loss because you now, Sindhu, had an opportunity to not get your favorite cereal and get something else. So the power of being able to know and predict the outcome of like how my freight's moving is really, really important to the operator who's managing that freight. And again, going back to like, how do you do that transparently? I think this is where technology, and I think Uber Freight's done a great job at this, technology and bringing that innovation and power of AI sooner has allowed us to navigate this complex ecosystem, right? That has thousands and millions of trucks moving all across this country at any point in time, but providing that visibility in the manner that operator can make sense and act on, going back to the signal where there is need to risk mitigate.
That's amazing. And like, what actions are they taking? So say, my Kellogg cereal is now delayed. What can they do in that time to say, okay, this is how I'm going to fix this?
Yeah, so I think, like, again, not always, but depending on, right, I think this is where the carrier part of the equation also comes, right? So there are carriers, right, where you can easily leave notifications. So think about like your Uber app. I'll do the more consumer example. Like your Uber app allows you to connect with Uber customer service while you're on a ride. If you get delayed, it says, hey, you're taking a wrong turn or you're going via a long route. Like that kind of insights allow them to, one, understand why there's a delay, right? So I think part of that is, again, understanding why. Second, hey, is this delay a one-time thing? Because look, they may not be able to do anything, Sindhu, to save that shipment to reach time. But what they can understand is, hey, I'm constantly noticing that the route from, I'm making up, Atlanta to Chicago is constantly having these delays for XYZ reason. What do I need to now do to service this differently? Do I need to move my...
Then it becomes an operations problem because then you can either front load or back load or connect it in a certain way. No, that's amazing. I love that, Akansha. This is awesome. And is there a human aspect to it as well? Like, are you bringing these complex systems together in a way to develop relationships, or is it just much more arm's length and insights?
No, I mean, look, it's always like relationships are the key of this at the end of the day, right? Because there are aspects of relationship I can talk about. Like again, I'm sure you can relate. Oftentimes when a curveball is thrown, it doesn't necessarily get thrown at you between 9 to 5. When you're in the middle of your sleep, like you'll get something breaks transactionally or somewhere, right, at 2 a.m. and you get that call more often than not. So I think that's when the trust is built or lost. I think, so again, the human aspect, like one of the things that like Uber, right, Uber Freight takes so much pride of is we truly believe that in addition to the technology and the solutions we have, we also have the best operators and expertise in-house. So when that shipper gets that 2 a.m. call, they know that they have somebody on the other end of the line to root cause this with them and come up with a solution. So like human in the loop, like is like, I might be the only controversial person saying this. I don't think AI is ever removing human in the loop. Like,
yeah, I think Peter Thiel would agree. Like even Peter Thiel would agree that literally humans at the end of the day, like,
it will make humans more effective and be able to do more and more insightful, productive, right, roles, but it is not removing human in the loop. So that
because I mean, even with AI, can you imagine like one bot like buying from another bot and that's all there was? There was just bots buying from bots. Like, I don't think so, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, all right, Akanksha, I think you're next.
I'm next. So this brings us into a little bit more conversations about AI. So you've been very clear that AI isn't just about efficiency, it's about building smarter, more responsive commercial engines. Where have you seen AI actually improve human connection with customers?
Yeah, so like I think there's a lot of conversations about AI from an insight perspective. So Kelsey, I'll take the other end of it, right? Which is the best AI often removes that friction before a human even notices it. So like I can't tie it back enough to signals, right? Surfacing the context, surfacing and predicting the risk. Um, we'll use the Kellogg example, right? Like it's predicting that this has a pattern and predicting that there is a risk. That doesn't mean that we can save the freight that's in movement right now, but we can figure out what the path and the solution should be going forward as it's predicted the risk. Um, the personalization of outreach, like and this will be very, like, you guys think about this a lot, right? Like events, marketing, the personalization at scale has been talked about for ages. But if you really think about this from an AI perspective now, like it truly allows you to personalize at scale, not necessarily to send it out as like by an AI and by a bot by itself, but it allows you to do a lot of that deeper discovery, research, customization, so that now Kelsey or Sindhu or Akansha can put their human touch on it faster to still reach those 1,000 people. I think that's the augmentation play. So I say this always, like AI is not overtaking any role that people talk about. What AI is doing is making that role extremely effective. But what it's also doing is it's allowing that role, whatever function, whatever event we're talking about, it's allowing us to now reach our customers where they want us to meet them faster and with efficiency.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that, Akanksha, because again, right, like, I mean, look at all the problems in the world that are not yet solved, right? Our environment is still needing a lot of help. Our education system needs a lot of help. Like, there are children who are still hungry as of today. I mean, these are like functional problems, and what are most human beings worried about? Like, how do I code, right? And I'm like, no, they like think about it as how many problems in the world are yet to be solved, and how can you now put the brilliance of human resources to finding a cure for cancer or making sure that the next pandemic doesn't take us out as a whole globe, right? Like, I mean, such important problems to solve. So I feel like, I know that it's almost like a journey to us now being able to solve very important problems at scale, because now you can actually focus on what matters versus how is the food on my table going to come about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think the important part here is, right, like I think it's not Sindhu, to be afraid of the technology. It's to embrace it, to figure out, to your point, like how do I unlock the rest of the intellect that I always had, right? But ran out of time, bandwidth, resources.
Yeah, was not efficient with because I didn't have the tools. And now I can be super efficient. Like, how many drugs can I test? And maybe there's
Exactly.
an exponential curve in drug testing because of AI, and it'll already tell you like what's going to work and what's not, right? So love it. Okay, we have like 4 minutes. I'm gonna like do rapid fire, and we're gonna end with this.
Sure.
All right. So Akanksha, what is one relationship that changed the trajectory of your career? And what
My
did it teach
husband.
you? Your husband. What did it teach you about leadership?
Um, what did it teach me about leadership? Look, I think my answer still holds true. Like I truly believe in, I think jokes apart, Sindhu, people say one of the best decisions you can make is the spouse or the partner that you choose. So
Yeah.
I still go back to that. And I think there's a lot of leadership principles you learn. My husband and I are poles apart, which is in reality how people that you work with, right, are. They're very different from how you operate. So how do you navigate, right, organizations, leadership, where you lead with empathy, you lead with humility, you're okay being corrected, you're okay apologizing, and you're okay apologizing first, right, if you fail. Um, while sometimes if you feel strongly, and I'm being vulnerable, like My husband and I have very different parenting styles, right? So sometimes it's also about, if I strongly believe that I have to hold the style of parenting in a certain situation, it's also holding the line. So it's not always compromise. I do think that I've learned a lot of those relationships and behaviors in real life as we've co-parented our kids.
I love it. Did you choose your husband or did your husband choose you?
I think we both chose each other. That's a topic for another day.
I chose my husband, I have to say, and one of the best decisions I made, because going to engineering school, you know how it is, right? You're one of the very few women and the choice is endless. So I feel like, okay, out of like a very confusing choice set, I made the right choice.
No, I'm married to a lawyer. So clearly did not happen in the obvious engineering school family.
Okay, I'm like, whatever, getting that glass of wine next time we meet.
Yes.
Love it. Okay. Kelsey, you're next then.
Well, I think we don't have time for any more questions. So, Akansha, thank you so much for bringing so much clarity, humanity, and honesty into this conversation.
No, I loved it. Thank you, Kelsey, and amazing hosts, both of you are. But look, I love this conversation also because it felt very much like a dialogue. And so I love all the perspectives and insights and absolutely had a ball of a time.
Awesome. And thank you to our listeners for joining us on In Great Company. And yeah, make your next event unforgettable. WeCrushEvents.com/contact us. And until next time, keep building in great company. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to In Great Company. Subscribe, leave a review, and share with someone who values strong business relationships. Until next time, stay connected and keep thriving.